Hello everyone, good afternoon in the US, good evening in Europe. It is time for my after show after the ninth round in Weikanze here. We had an exciting day today. I don't know if you guys saw, I published a quick recap earlier of the game of the day. The game of the day mostly because of who was playing between Alireza Firouzja and Magnus Carlsen. As most of you probably already know, Magnus won in pretty convincing fashion today with the black pieces, which puts him in a tie with Alireza at 5.5 out of 9, both of them. But now Fabiano Caruana, who drew today, takes the sole lead in the tournament with 6 points. It was an interesting round of chess, even though there was only one decisive game today. We're going to start by going through the decisive game because it, was definitely the most expected game today. And then the other games had some pretty interesting moments, some kind of funny ones, and I think they are certainly worth taking a look. So we are going to do that. We're going to start with the Alireza Carlsen game. Alireza started with e4 as he normally does. And Magnus plays a couple of different things. As you all know, he likes to play the Zveshnikov. That was sort of the thing that he sprung out a lot in the match against Fabiano for the World Championship. But he's also continued to play e4, e5, and he's been very, very solid in these lines. There's a repertoire book, for example, that was written by Larry Kaufman in the U.S. that was playing the Breyer version of the Rai Lopez, and that's something that's still very much a staple of his repertoire. He does start with knight f6 in this game, so he can also play the Berlin. I guess he feels like he's happy to get into an endgame against Alireza, who has shown mostly incredible prowess in complicated positions. But Alireza, not much of a surprise, plays d3. And now Magnus plays d6. Probably, the most popular move is bishop c5 here, but d6 is certainly very playable. And this tends to transpose into more normal Rai Lopez positions with some kind of interesting wrinkles. So, black hasn't played b5 yet, so that changes things a little bit. One of the options for white is to take on c6 in these positions, especially if they haven't committed to c3. After c3, it makes a little bit less sense, but sometimes they play with c4 also. But here, the players basically transpose to a normal position, except that white has played bishop c2. So when you play the Rai Lopez normally and you start with a6 on move 3, then and b5 gets played earlier, generally white hasn't played c3 yet and puts the bishop on b3. So in some variations, that's a gain of a tempo for white, because if black plays, for example, knight a5, almost invariably white would answer with bishop c2. So in some cases, you're winning a tempo. In other cases, though, the bishop on c2 is a little bit less aggressive. So, of course, there's no ideas with knight to g5 targeting f7 when the bishop is on c2. But after this, the players reach a normal position. And what's interesting about this game is that I think it really showcased the importance of just having experience in the Rai Lopez and these structures, which Magnus has played already, dozens of games is probably not right. It's probably more like hundreds even of slow games in this type of structure with both sides. He plays them with white and black, while Alireza really only plays them with white, and he's only 16 years old, so there's a limit to how much experience he can get. So let me go back here. He did play the move a3 and move 13, which is definitely not the most popular move. I'm not sure if Alireza was in theory here, maybe not. Certainly a3 is a reasonable move. It's interesting to note that Magnus played white against Navarra in this position all the way back in 2008, over 10 years ago, at the Chess Olympiad in Dresden, Germany, which was incidentally the last Olympiad in which I played for Canada myself. So I do remember seeing Magnus there. I didn't play against him, but I did see him. So anyway, Magnus had played d5 in this position, which I think is a more critical move, but a3 is not bad. Now, after knight b8, I don't like the way that Alireza played, and I think this is where he starts to go wrong. So he switches back to the plan with d5. However, here he doesn't gain a tempo anymore. I think the most natural way to play, and the sort of justification of having played a3, is to play b4, followed by bishop b2. And then if you can, you might even want to play c4 with white to kind of give this bishop some life on the long diagonal. And I think this plan is reasonable for white, and I don't know that white is better, but it's certainly a very playable, complex game. Instead, he switches back to the d5 plan, and now I feel like a3 is at best a wasted move, and in some cases it's actually sort of a negative because the bishop might want to come to a3, and we'll see why. Because after c6, often we get into a structure where white will play b3 and c4, and here the pawn on a3 is just misplaced. And in fact, so he plays c4 here, knight d7, and now he decides to play a4. So that's kind of admitting that he wasted a tempo over all these variations. Not necessarily the end of the world, but things are just starting to go wrong already in the opening here for white. So Magnus plays queen c7, followed by rook e to c8, and that's actually a very sort of instructive move. He realizes that his main play in this position is going to be on the queen side. So it's tempting to move the other rook to c8. But the e rook is probably the correct one because he's keeping the b file for his other rook. And so now it's a little bit awkward for white to me, right? They want to be able to recapture with the c pawn on c takes d5, but their bishop is hanging. They can't play bishop d3 because the knight comes to c5 and hits it, and that's also quite unpleasant. So he plays rook a2, but already the position is uncomfortable for white here. So Magnus plays some natural moves, and I'm not going to go too slowly here because I do want to move things along. But essentially, the black position is just super pleasant here. He's got a nice target on e4. White's bishops are kind of hitting nothing and don't have any prospects for better squares. Black is controlling the two fully open files, and they're hard it's hard for white to contest that. In some cases, the pawn on a4 becomes a weakness. The bishop on f8 has a nice square on h6. This is just already a much more pleasant position for black to play. So some moves happen here. I'm going to go quite quickly. By the way, if you want more detail, I do believe that Peter Svidler is putting together a longer recap of this instructive game, and so you'll be able to watch that at some point. I'm not sure if it's been published yet. So you can see here that Ali Reza is just starting to move his knights back and forth. He simply doesn't have much of a plan, and the pieces are kind of on their best, if not, they just don't have a good way to untangle themselves. And so Magnus slowly improves his position until Ali Reza finally decides to play g3, which is a big compromise because it really weakens the king side. Again, probably not all best moves. Ali Reza was already starting to be in time pressure, and now things kind of collapse. Black hasn't actually won a pawn because the pawn on d6 hangs, but all of the pieces here are in just white is just dominated, right? The two knights are tied to one another. The rook is coming to c2. The pawn on e4 is falling. Black has two bishops. King is safer. So obviously this is just a winning position for black. Now, however, the game ends really abruptly, and this is pretty unusual. White didn't have any time left here, so he seemingly blunders, right? So he clearly missed that after queen takes f2, which is what happened, king takes f2, bishop takes f1, that he's losing a piece by force. So after king takes f1, there's bishop takes d2, which we'll look at in a second. But the simpler variation is, of course, if knight takes f1, then knight takes e4, simply wins a piece, and with that the game. So it looks like the game is over here, and in fact Ali Reza did resign. But after king takes f1, bishop takes d2, bishop takes e5, it's actually not that trivial to win for black. And the main point is that on bishop c3, so the white is threatening to go rook b6 and win the knight back on f6, and it's not a super easy thing to prevent. So the most obvious moves to prevent it are bishop c3. So on bishop c3, white plays rook c1 and then manages to win at least an exchange back. And this is still a difficult position. It's quite possible that either knight takes e4 or bishop takes g3 may still be winning for black, but it's certainly not a trivial position, and certainly not a position that someone would resign with white if they were able to get it. Bishop c3 is not forced. There's also the idea to play bishop b4. So bishop b4 stops rook b6 by interposing a piece, but there's actually a simple and strong move here, g4, and then the idea is to play g5, and it's actually quite difficult to stop it. Probably the best move is rook e8. The bishop goes back as far as it can to not be a target, and after g5, again, black is going to be better in some way, but because they'll probably be up a pawn, but it's certainly not game over yet, and I think white would certainly play into this if they could. And finally, maybe the move that looks the strongest is rook e8 instead of either bishop c3 or bishop b4. The bishop again goes back to a1, rook takes e4, and the position just gets really complicated here. And you know, I think it's still likely to be winning for black, but it's not so easy, and they have to watch for certain tricks. For example, here d6, if rook e6, then d7, rook d6, and now I think rook b6 is probably just about okay. That looks like it's going to be a draw. I think I actually blundered earlier and said bishop takes f6, but on bishop takes f6 now it's black who is winning with rook takes f6 check. So we do have to play rook b6 first. But yeah, anyway, so this was quite interesting. This is sort of the second game in a row that Magnus opponents resign a little bit early, right? I mean, in the Vityugov game yesterday, certainly black was in big trouble, but there was no immediate loss of material. And in this case, it looked like it was completely over, but there were actually still chances. So I always tell people not to resign too fast. It really doesn't cost much to make moves. Of course, Alireza had literally no time, so but he could have made the moves. King takes f1, of course, is a move you can make right away. And then the game could have gone on a little bit, and I'm curious to see if Magnus would have found a simple way to win, but it didn't seem so easy. But this was sort of a great game for Magnus, I think, who really showed his class and his experience, and for him, a good way to sort of make sure that he stays on top of the next generation as time goes, even if it's just from a confidence perspective. Let me remind you that they had played a banter game on Chess24 where Magnus had, I guess you could say, it poked a little bit of fun at his opponent, Fantastic Star, who was Alireza. And I will actually play this video again for you because I think yesterday when I played it I didn't have the sound. I'm going to try to fix that today. Let me know if it works.
Oh my god, he's so tricky. Threatening rook b8, obviously. But now he really has nothing. Yeah, check, I take, knight c6, b3. So now he's turning to his other tricks, yeah, playing fast. Oh my god, he's so tricky. Threatening rook b8, obviously. Okay, bishop d3, why not? So now he really has nothing. Yeah, check, I take, knight c6, king e8, playing e3 safe. So now he's turning to his other tricks, yeah, playing fast. Oh my god, he's so... And he resigned! Yes! Rook b8, obviously. Makes me so happy. Beating one of the best young...
Alright, so we are back here. This is also probably the time for me to show you that Chess24 just published a course from Magnus. You can access it if you're a premium member. It's included in the premium membership. And if you are not a premium member, then it is also possible to buy it a la carte. It's called Attacking Without Sacrificing. It's actually a little bit like today's game in a sense, in that Magnus did not sacrifice but gradually increased his advantage and won a very nice game. So so that is that. I'm going to move to the other games here. First, I guess we're going to go kind of in some order. All the other games were draws today, so nobody else really made a leap in the standings. We're going to start with the Anand Dubov game, if only because I think it makes sense, because the game is, first of all, the game is fairly short, but it also follows an opening that you'll be very familiar with because it happened in the last game between Anand with white against Magnus just 2 rounds ago. So they had the exact same position here after d4, d5. which, by the way, sort of when I was a kid, or maybe some 15, 20 years ago, call it, it used to be that black would usually play this first and then play d5. But these positions after e5, knight e4, knight c3 were not that easy for black to hold. I mean, I think black was considered to be slightly worse. And then it was sort of discovered that by playing d5 first without trading the c-pawns here is a little bit more accurate for black. And this has been sort of the standard way to play. Now after e5, knight e4, bishop e3 is sort of one of these new moves. White is constantly looking for ways to pose problems to black in the opening. And Mickey Adams has played this a few times, I think, recently, and Anand obviously has played it as well. But Magnus had played, if you remember, instead of playing d5, he had played a6, and got into a worse position. So here Dubov, it's kind of interesting because everybody knows that Dubov has in the past worked with Magnus. Dubov kind of shows a more solid way here for black to play, and in this game, Anand really didn't manage to get much of anything. So it's kind of back to the drawing board. This queen takes e6 move is probably best. It was also played by a strong grandmaster, Ivan Saric from I believe is it Croatia or Bosnia? I apologize. I may be I'm not totally sure. But in this game, Adams with white had played a4 against Saric, and here Anand tried d takes c5. I'm sure this was some preparation, but Dubov seemed very well prepared, and he just played bishop g4, sort of a strong move to start. And after knight d2, knight takes d2, bishop takes d2, queen takes c5. There really is nothing here for white. Black is just too solid. And so the game just kind of went into a draw. So I do wonder what Anand had in mind. I mean, it seems like Dubov was well prepared and just managed to equalize very quickly. So sort of back to the drawing board for white in this variation. We are going to move to the Vityugov Caruana game. That game is a little bit it's kind of a funny one because if let's say you've been living in a cocoon for 10 years and you've never seen this variation, in the Nimzo Indian, this looks like an extremely exciting game. It starts with this variation in the queen c2 line, and it's extremely sharp. The only thing is that this has been played several times by many different players, but Caruana himself had some games, notably against Mamedyarov and other people. I think even Magnus possibly, and even I have had some games. And this variation with queen h4. So on move 10, black plays queen h4. It's extremely sharp, but as happens with some of these complicated variations, we end up in sort of long forcing sequences that have been analyzed, and it actually doesn't turn out to be that exciting. And so in this case, it's sort of both players testing each other in the theory here. So g5, again, a crazy looking move, and the variations are not as complicated as they look because it's quite forcing. White can't really move their bishop out of the way because black can simply take on c3 and take on e5. So they normally play c takes d5. Now in this position, Fabiano actually had a different game against Mamedyarov. I think it wasn't that long ago, only maybe a couple of months ago, where he played today he played g takes f4. In that game, he had played bishop takes c3, b takes c3, g takes e4, d takes e6. Kind of a crazy position. Knight takes e5, bishop takes e4, and somehow he drew. But it wasn't actually the cleanest game, and maybe he thought that white was a little bit better. Of course, structurally white looks to be better, but the activity that black has kind of compensates for that. He did draw without any problems in that game, but maybe he didn't love it. So he played g takes f4 today, which is has already been played also. So it's sort of a game with a lot of theory today. D takes e6, knight takes c3, pawn takes d7, kind of forced. Bishop takes d7, b takes c3, f takes g3, h takes g3. This is all forced. And now rook c8, a strong move. And this, but again, the thing is, I think both players probably have seen these games already. This has all been played a few times, and there seems to be only a very nominal advantage for white in these complications. And with a computer, it's easy. As a human, you look at it and you're like, this is all very complicated, but things get simplified. So queen d1 is a new move here. I think in the past this has been played. It goes like this: bishop takes d4, bishop b7. It's also possible, I think, to play. Actually, here bishop takes b7 is probably the main move. Queen takes e5, and white has sort of an illusion of an advantage because of their slightly better pawn structure, but in reality, this is just equal. Not a problem for Fabiano to hold this. So instead of this, after bishop takes c3, Vichigov tried queen d1, but it's not really much of an attempt at anything. Fabiano actually had a very strong response here. He just played queen takes d1, rook takes d1, and he doesn't want to play the position with bishop against knight, because the knight is very strong on f5, and he would love to take on e5, but here simply knight e7 wins. So this would be just a much worse endgame. Next move, white will play f4. So that's what white is, of course, hoping for. However, he doesn't have to take on f5. He has a very strong move, rook c4, and that sort of forces the opposite colored bishop position, which again is optically a little bit better for white, but in reality, he didn't even want to try here. He just decided that it was a draw. Here, black could simply take on e5, rook takes b7, and bishop d4, and there's no pawn break, so there's really nothing that white can do. So this was just a solid game for Fabiano. He's in a good position in the tournament based on the pairings that he has in the next few rounds. Some might claim that he's the favorite to win this tournament. The Anish Giri game is sort of another very theoretical game. I'm not going to go through it too quickly. It starts with the exchange Slav, which is less innocuous than some might think it is. It's not that drawish in some variations, but the line that they played today is extremely drawish. And this rook c8 move is sort of the move that makes the variation innocuous. White does win a pawn, but it becomes almost a useless pawn because of the presence of opposite colored bishops. So this has been, I think this has actually been played many times before. So I'm not sure why Wesley went for this today. He's had a good tournament so far, and maybe you would think that after an off day, maybe he would feel like trying something more aggressive, because I don't think that he thought that he had serious chances to win this position. So I don't know, maybe he wasn't feeling well, or there can always be all sorts of factors that I am not aware of, but I was a little bit surprised and disappointed that this game was not a little bit more aggressive. But certainly players that do play exciting games are Kovalyov and Van Foreest. Jorden Van Foreest has had a fantastic tournament, and he's playing creatively, he's playing aggressive openings, and yeah, so this was going to be an exciting game. Kovalyov, of course, not having a good tournament, but he's really got nothing to lose at this point. I thought this was an interesting one to look at, because we have seen so many different moves in this position in Najdorf in this tournament alone. So in the Challengers tournament, I think Van Foreest's brother sprang out bishop d2. Then there's also someone who played rook g1. Of course, all sorts of moves have been popular for white in the last few years: h3, h4, a4, knight b3, all sorts of moves that the old masters, as I like to refer to, would have cringed and thought this was so not principled. But in this age of computer preparation, sometimes it's just about having looked at the position and feeling comfortable. And in fact, I don't know about all of these moves, but the game with bishop d2, white got a significantly better position. So, but in this game, this is sort of a failed experiment. Queen e2 is actually not that abnormal. There is a pretty popular line where you play bishop g5 here, e6, and either queen e2 right away, or you can play f4 first and then queen e2. And those lines are actually pretty theoretical and sharp. But here, queen e2 right away, it does look a little bit weird to block the bishop like this already. And so Van Foreest decides to just switch to a dragon setup, and I think that makes a lot of sense. The queen is not particularly well placed on e2, especially with the bishop not on e4. There is a variation where you do that, but the bishop has already gone to c4. While here with the bishop on f1, you may be forced to kind of play a g3, bishop g2, and maybe that's what White should have done, because he continues to play aggressively, but here just lands in a much worse position right away. So e5, definitely does not work out for White in this game, and it's sort of instructive why not, but maybe he could have played something like f4 or even just a quiet move like g3, bishop g2, I don't know. But e5 definitely does not work out well. Pawn takes e5, a strong response here. And after, I don't know if Kovalyov intended to play knight e6. Knight e6 certainly is like the move that you play for when you play e5. However, this is a fairly simple position. It reminds me of one very famous line in the Yugoslav Dragon where White castles queenside, without playing bishop c4. Black plays d5 and things get simplified, and you can sacrifice your queen. This reminds me of that variation, and I looked at it with the computer a little bit today, but even intuitively, it just looks like it's a good position for Black. If you take here, there's all sorts of discoveries with the knight. It might be that the best move is something like f3, knight c6, but it's just, I don't know if it's actually better for Black, but it's certainly not worse, and it's an easy position. Black can play, for b5, b4, the knight can spring to d4. The White king is only protected by one knight, and you're going to have literally 6 black pieces, going against it. This control of the center is definitely in Black's favor. So of course, it's a queen against rook and piece, but it's definitely, I would take Black any day of the week in a slow or in a rapid game. So he decided not to go for knight e6, play knight f3 instead. But after that, it really is just a bad position for White. It's just a Sicilian gone wrong. Black has opened the center. You know how Black always wants to play d6, d5, and open the center? Well, in this case, White did it for them, and this king is just in a terrible situation. So he ends up in just a sort of forced to go for broke and ends up in just a terrible endgame here. However, somehow Kovalyov managed to escape with a draw here. I'll just leave you with one variation because it gets a little bit messy. But here it seems like bishop g4 is probably not the most accurate move. After forking the 2 rooks here, it looks like maybe taking on d1 would have been a very strong move. So now White can try to take on d1, but then the bishop g4 check is very strong, with the idea that if king c1, rook to d8, we're threatening a very nice mate on d1 here, and so that means that the rook manages to escape. And there's other variations, but knight takes d1 just looks like it was the strongest move. I guess one other line would be knight takes e8, and then knight f2. And again, the issue is that this knight becomes a bad piece, and so tactically here, I think Jorden probably was a little bit upset. He got in a position up in exchange, and I'll just show you the endgame really quickly. He gets into this endgame, which unfortunately looks like, the computers might give a -2, -3, I don't know. But this is just a simple fortress, and it's not even, doesn't even seem possible for Black to create much of any chances. And so they played until move 68 or so, and the game ended. This is a good time to point out that, and I'm actually going to switch my scene here. But we are going to run. We're just trying something out. We're going to have a fantasy chess situation, or what can I call it? Fantasy chess, daily fantasy chess. We're going to try it out. There are some questions. Let me show you the link here. All right. So this is the link. This is the link to the fantasy chess. It's also going to be posted on our news site. If you answer the questions and end up winning with the highest score, the highest fantasy score, then you will get a free mug. These mugs that are being seen everywhere in the world. I won't read the text, but you know what I mean. And so you will win one of these mugs if you are a premium member, and if you are not a premium member, then you will get a free month of premium membership. So this is just something we're trying out. If you guys like the format, I think it will be fun, and we'll keep doing it, and hopefully maybe we'll have bigger prizes in the future. Who knows? So I'm going back to my regular view here so I can show you some chess. We only have a couple of games left. There was the game between Vlad Artemyev and Yangyi was a draw. It actually started as, it looked like a very innocuous opening for white, very symmetrical, but it actually ended up being a very successful opening for white. So this is of course a funny position. You know, when we see these symmetrical positions, sometimes it happens. You know, a beginner tries to copy you. This is one of those cases where black can do it and get away with it. So entirely symmetrical, but I don't love this version for black. It just looks like the knight gets in a bit of a bad spot. So I think this one is actually, I would not advise, you know, this sort of beginner strategy in this exact position. And here black quickly got in trouble. I think probably he had to try to go back with his knight on c6. But you know, white is up 2 tempos, right? He's already got rook d1 and he's got a free move. So I rather like this for white. But yeah, in this game he quickly gets in trouble, plays bishop f5, bishop e3, knight g4, bishop g5. And this just turned into really a horrible position for black. The opposite colored bishop here position, you know, sometimes it's tempting to go into this. Here it really is not tempting at all, because not only is black down a pawn, and it's a somewhat important pawn. We have a 4 against 3 on the king side. This is actually going to be a very easy one for white to play. The bishop on d6 cuts off the only fully open file, so white will be able to play rook d1, control that file. There's no easy way for black to break free. So white will be able to play something like f3, king f2, e4, and this is just kind of a nightmare of a position, and the position almost plays itself for white. So he didn't want to go for that. But the position that he got, just down a pawn with really no compensation. In fact, less than any compensation. But what was weird is that it seems like Artemyev here never quite found the right plan, and it seems like in most of the positions the right plan involved playing knight e2 and knight d4, and it would have been strong right here. F4 was certainly not a bad move, and definitely natural to kind of try to lock in this bishop, because now this bishop can only come to h6, but if we defend the pawn either with knight e2 or rook d4, the bishop really doesn't have an easy way out. And so I'm sure he figured he was just completely winning here, but a lot of moves happen. He starts to not do much, and at a lot of points, basically, he has to try to play knight e2, knight d4. From there, the knight hits e6, f5, and c6, and so it becomes hard for black to hold everything. But he shuffled his pieces. I don't know if he was running out of time until he plays a3, and a3 actually gives away the advantage, because I couldn't figure this out for a little while, but the problem with a3 is that it gives up control of the b3 square, and giving up control of the b3 square is a big deal, because you cannot play knight e2 and to d4 anymore. Whenever you go knight e2, there's rook b3 check, or rook b3 to rook d3, and there's issues. So he let this slip away, and the rest of the game, I'll spare you the rest, but it ends in a draw reasonably quickly after that. So the last game was between Jeffery, Xiong and Jan-Christoph Duda. This show is maybe starting to be a little bit longer than I thought it would be, so I'll keep it brief. But it was an Italian game. If you remember in the game that, in some of the Jorden van Foreest games, you know, black was playing knight f6, which allows all of these knight g5 variations, which are arguably not any better for white, but are certainly more complex. But of course, most people still play bishop c5, which is a safer variation. And now we get into this standard plan that has been played countless times. You know, with the a4 is sort of the modern way of playing the Italian game. It seems like the analysis that the computers provide is that it's important to grab space on the queen side, and I don't love the way that Jeffery handled this one. You know, I think knight e7 is a little bit premature. It might be easier to equalize playing something like castling, or and at some point bishop e6, rather than playing knight e7, knight g6, only because it feels like he's wasted a little bit of time. But we get to an interesting position where he decided to play b5, and b5 was certainly not forced. But in fact, it's possible that c6 would have been a little more. Well, it's certainly safer. I don't know if it's. I can't say that it's better, but with the idea of eventually playing d5, that was certainly possible also. But I'm sure he didn't love the hole on b6, which maybe is a big deal, maybe is not. I'm sure that white is not that much better, but it does seem like white achieved a little bit, at least enough to be happy with the outcome of the opening. But on the other hand, after b5, I didn't love his position here. I think the sort of long-term strategic weaknesses, he's got 2 pawn islands is one way to look at it, and white has only 1 pawn island. All these pawns are connected. But then it was a long, complicated game, and eventually it petered out to a drawn endgame. But it was an interesting game, if only because of the opening. But I think this was a round of chess that was a little bit quieter than the other ones, maybe because everyone was just watching what was happening with Magnus. But Magnus certainly made up for it with a convincing victory with black, and now he's only half a point back from first place, so it's going to be interesting to see whether he manages to win the tournament. I mean, he's kind of coming. We call that sometimes a submarine. You start slow and then you go up as you go up to the surface towards the end of the tournament. That seems to be what he's doing right now. So we're going to follow the rest of the tournament with interest. I think I'm going to be doing another after show tomorrow, and we're going to do it at 10 o'clock in 10 o'clock Central European time zone, 4 o'clock in the U.S. I think that's a good time, and you can also stream the show directly if you don't tune in live. I'm going to leave you with the Chessable promotion that we have. They have a free video that you should check out, and it features their great proprietary move trainer software, which is a great way to learn. Is a great way to learn quickly using sort of new age AI tools. Have a great night, and I'll see you tomorrow.